My name is Holly, and I'm a registered nutritionist, and I work with Dr. Kristen Spark at Verge Your Wellness Clinic. So I would like to know if you want to hop into the chat and let me know what brought you here today. So I know a lot of us are struggling. You know, quarantine life has been really difficult. And now with the most recent changes, we're in code orange, and who knows what the next little while will bring. It's really stressful, right? So a lot of you, especially if you have kids at home, you're probably dealing with working from home while you're taking care of the kids. Maybe you're worried about money, or the stress is affecting your sleep and your mental health. I know a lot of people that I've been talking to have been turning to food as a comfort, so a lot more emotional eating than usual, perhaps. So if that's you, that's normal, I guess, in a way, but we're going to learn tonight how it's kind of a vicious cycle. So, if you're turning to food for comfort and that's like your main way of dealing with stress, unfortunately, that's going to have some consequences on your gut health and other aspects of your health. And then that in turn is going to negatively impact your mental health. So we're going to see how it's kind of a vicious cycle. But I mean, and I noticed here too, I put in people are also losing patience with loved ones, and our mental health is going to impact our relationships, right? So, oh, you brew kombucha, Dion. That's cool. Yes, so, if you're struggling with mental health, that's going to impact all aspects of your life, whether it's your career, your relationship with your children, your partner, your job. So it's really important. I know a lot of us, we might be thinking it's just stress, but that stress is going to have a direct impact on our mental health, and that impacts all aspects of our life, including our physical health. So we're going to dive into today some of these root causes, these root physical health causes that can affect our mental health and vice versa. So what we know so far, we know that mental health issues are caused by a brain chemical imbalance. So you'll hear me say throughout the presentation that the term neurotransmitters. So neurotransmitters are basically just a term for the chemicals in your brain that govern your mental health. So things like serotonin, dopamine, and GABA. You've probably heard of some or all of these before, but that's exactly what's happening when we have mental health issues. But we're not really told why that's happening, right? So there obviously counseling and medications are the main things that are offered to us, and obviously those are really important and helpful. But there's also many root causes. So when we do something like take a medication, yes, it's boosting our feel-good hormones, but we're not looking at, well, why are they off in the first place, right? So tonight we're going to dive into those underlying root causes that are causing this imbalance in the first place. And oftentimes it's a mix of many factors, right? It's not just one, it's not just gut health, it's not just stress, it's usually several things going on that's going to be impacting your mental health. Okay, so thank you everyone for sharing what's going on. I'd also like to know, what's your bigger why? So obviously you want to feel better and feel happier. We all want that, right? But what is your bigger why? Is it because you want to improve relationships, or show up more in your job, or just have more energy, or whatever it is? Well, how is it impacting your life as a whole? I'd like to know that as well. If you're open to sharing, you don't feel you have to. So today we're going to talk about some and all of these underlying causes. So hormone imbalances, sleep and stress, gut health and inflammation, nutrient deficiencies, and food sensitivities. So if you don't know much about my practice yet, I am a registered nutritionist. I have degrees in psychology and nutrition. So I like to, do a lot of reading. I'm a science nerd, but I'm also a chocoholic. So I get it. I've been there, and I am still there sometimes with you guys where, when you feel down and you want your treats to make you feel better, right? But I have been through quite a long healing journey, which started when I was in school and struggling with my mental health. And, you know, I ended up trying a medication, definitely helped, but I realized that there was something else going on. And it's only once I start working with a naturopath did I realize that my gut health was having a huge impact on my mental health. And only once I started making some big changes with my gut healing, did I fully start feeling myself again. So we're going to learn more about that tonight. But what I do is I work with mainly women, but men too sometimes, to empower them to, you know, boost their mood, metabolism, and energy so they can kind of, you know, get their body and their life back. Because a lot of us just feel worn out. We're, you know, not feeling like we used to. We don't have energy. We don't have the mental capacity to deal with stress. And a lot of us are disconnected from our bodies. We're very much, you know, go, 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 focused on what I have to accomplish. And we're very externally focused, right? So it's always work life or home life. The to-do list is endless, and that's our main goal. But we don't often tune inward and ask ourselves what we need internally, as well as tuning into our body's needs. So that's something I help people do, because many of us have been focused on external diet rules and diet culture in terms of food, and thinking that, you know, some foods are good or they're bad and labeling them, whereas we really should just be tuning into our body's needs, right? We're eating if we're hungry, we're resting if we're tired. So just kind of get back to those basics and honor your body's needs. Okay, so these are some of the root causes we're going to dive into tonight. And it very much isn't just stress. So I've had quite a few people come to me saying, you know, I had a lot of stress going on in my life, but I should be able to handle it, right? It's just stress. I should be able to shake it off, but I just feel so off and I can't figure out why. Like, I'm not motivated. I can't focus at work. I'm snapping at my family members. And you know, as much as we've come so far with mental health awareness, I think a lot of people just still aren't recognizing that some of these symptoms, it's not just stress. It is, the stress is actually taking a toll and causing a mental health problem. So these are some of the symptoms we need to be able to recognize and say, hey, like, I do have something going on here and I should reach out for help. So we're going to look at how stress directly impacts mental health and affects your brain function in terms of those neurotransmitters by causing inflammation. It's going to disrupt our sleep cycles, and it downregulates the production of our happy hormones like serotonin. Someone asked if poor gut health can cause migraines. It definitely can contribute to migraines. It's not always the cause, but it's often a huge source of inflammation. And that inflammation, as we'll learn tonight, any inflammation that's in the gut can circulate through the whole body and cause inflammation in the brain. So yes, it definitely can. Okay, so today we're going to talk, right now we're going to talk more about the gut-brain inflammation connection, as we just kind of answered that question there. So why do we have this gut inflammation in the first place? And let's look at how it's all connected. So as you'll see in the little diagram there, this gut inflammation, it leaves the gut, enters your circulation, and enters your brain and affects your mental health. But on the other hand, when your mental health is off, that feeling down and that stress and that mood that you're in directly impacts and causes more inflammation in the brain, and actually causes gut issues. So just the fact that you're stressed and upset and in this poor mental health state, that can directly promote the growth of inflammatory gut bacteria and cause this gut inflammation. So it's this vicious cycle there. So why do we have this gut inflammation? You'll hear me use the term dysbiosis kind of throughout the presentation tonight, and that means an imbalance or an overgrowth of microbes in your gut. So your gut microbiome is made up of trillions of microbes. That includes bacteria, yeast, viruses, and parasites. And some of them are good, some of them are bad, and some of them are just more neutral. They all kind of have roles. But when we have things like a poor diet, so that's lots of sugar and carbs and low in fiber, when we're taking in a lot of toxins, or when we're having alcohol and medications, that's all going to contribute to this dysbiosis, this imbalance or overgrowth of inflammatory microbes in our gut. And on that note, just the whole thing about the gut inflammation, like not staying in the gut, but actually, you know, affecting the whole body and the brain. I heard a quote recently that someone said, your gut isn't Las Vegas. What happens in the gut doesn't stay in the gut. So I really like that, and it's kind of easy to remember and fun. So that might be something that hits home for you. Okay, so as I mentioned, we have over 100 trillion microbes in our gut. We actually have more microbes than human cells. So it makes sense that these microbes are having such a dramatic impact on our physical and mental health and all aspects of it. So you may know of some of the beneficial bacteria, which we call probiotics. So things like Lactobacillus acidophilus and bifidobacteria. Don't worry about these big words if they're confusing to you. Those are just like the main ones that are typically found in things like yogurt. And then we have some neutral ones, which are also called commensal, and then we have some harmful ones. And even some of the, you know, quote unquote harmful bacteria, things that we think of that's harmful, like E. coli, is actually naturally occurring in our gut and does actually play a role in our body. It's just a matter of, you know, it needs to be kept in check. It needs to be in a certain amount. So when Dr. Spark and I look at people's gut microbiome tests, we look at the amounts of these microbes, not just whether they're there. It tells us the actual amount, so we know, okay, this is, you know, technically a healthy bacteria, but there's way too much of it, so we have to balance it out. And that's something we do looking at through stool tests, which I can talk more on later, but I don't want to dive too deep into that just yet. Okay, so the gut-brain connection, there's a couple ways that things are connected here. And one of them is the vagus nerve. So the vagus nerve runs from your gut to your brain. So it's like a two-way superhighway of information. And sorry, I lost my notes here. I'm just going to bring them back up. And this vagus nerve, it actually senses, you know, things that are going on in the gut based on the microbes that are in there. And it transfers that information to the brain, and then that tells the brain what to do to the body, basically. So it's this constant back and forth information through the gut and the brain through the vagus nerve, but also the microbe and the gut interactions directly impact the brain. But before we dive any more into that, I just wanted to say that stress directly inhibits the function of this vagus nerve. So you may have heard the term, you have butterflies in your stomach, or your stomach is off because you're stressed or you're anxious, right? That's exactly what's happening with the vagus nerve. It's getting, it's inhibited. So it's not doing its job when you're stressed. It's not communicating properly. And something that's really cool, if you may have tried this before, if you've ever done deep breathing actually stimulates your vagus nerve, and you may actually start to notice, like, you feel some gurgles or some, you know, things start moving better in your gut when you do that deep breathing, because you're stimulating that vagus nerve. And a really interesting fact, antidepressant drugs, which are also called SSRIs, they did studies in rats, and if you sever the vagus nerve, so this nerve that runs to and from the gut and the brain, those drugs don't work, so they won't actually have an effect. So the research is suggesting that they may work on more on the gut than the brain itself. So it's pretty interesting stuff. So let's talk more about the gut microbe interactions. So the immune system is a huge role here. Your probiotics, your bacteria in your gut, directly impact with your gut lining, which is called your well, there's some called enterochromaffin cells, but there's a bunch of different cells in there. And they directly affect your immune system through those gut cells. So they will either stimulate healthy immune signaling to boost your immune system, or they will stimulate inflammatory immune signaling. And there's actually a lot of research that's come out on the role of what's called cytokines. So these are immune molecules in depression. So inflammatory immune molecules playing a major role in depression. It's pretty interesting stuff. The other role there is histamine. So we know about histamine in terms of allergies, but gut bacteria can actually both produce as well as prevent the breakdown of histamine in the gut. And then that histamine will build up and circulate throughout the body and the brain, and that can contribute to not just brain fog, but also poor mental health as well. And then we have things like cofactors. So these are vitamins and minerals that your gut bacteria actually produce and help you absorb. And those are used to actually build these brain chemicals, things like serotonin and dopamine. So there's quite a few nutrients that we need to actually build these happy hormones, and we're going to dive more into that. Oh, is the audio okay, everyone? Let me know. So we're going to dive more into how exactly these happy hormones are made. But for now, we're just going to talk about the role that they do affect our absorption of these vitamins, and they can actually produce these vitamins too. Okay, and then the other thing is the building blocks. So when we eat protein, proteins are made up of amino acids. These are the building blocks of protein. And our body uses these to help build these happy hormones. So the two main ones we'll talk about tonight is tryptophan, which is used to build serotonin, one of the happy hormones, and tyrosine, so that's used to build dopamine. And so that's all part of the process of building these happy hormones. And then we're going to talk about the role of leaky gut. So if you've heard of leaky gut, basically that is what happens when you have this dysbiosis, this chronic gut inflammation, and eventually you start to have like this thinning of the gut lining, and you develop microscopic holes or pores, and that allows certain things to leak into your bloodstream, causing inflammation. So and I mean, obviously, if that's leaking into the bloodstream, that's going to stimulate your immune system. There's going to be all kinds of inflammation going on there. Okay, let's move on. So we're talking about where brain inflammation comes from. It comes from chronic stress. So cortisol, one of the stress hormones itself, will actually cause brain inflammation. It comes from gut bacteria, so not just bacteria, but other microbes that are inflammatory. They will cause inflammation, like we just talked about. It comes from allergies, so if you're constantly eating something that you're reacting to, if you have a food sensitivity or allergy, that's going to cause inflammation, typically through that immune signaling, such as cytokines, or from histamine. Or it could be an environmental allergy as well. And that's why you feel quite foggy and off if you have seasonal allergies. That can make you feel really out of it. And then it can be from insulin resistance. So we're going to talk about blood sugar tonight. Blood sugar plays a major role in mental health. And it can also come from emotional stress, as we talked about with that, bi-directional highway. And also sleep deprivation. So we really have to work on optimizing sleep when it comes to mental health. So let's dive into a little bit of a science. I try not to get too sciencey on you. If you have any questions, feel free to ask as we go along. I'm keeping an eye on the chat there. Oops, lost my notes again. Where did they go? One moment here, just trying to find my notes. Okay, so let's talk about serotonin first. A lot of these neurotransmitters, also science rocks, yes it does, Christine. Neurotransmitters, so they're produced in the gut and the brain. And originally they were thought to have only been produced in the brain, which is why we thought that these antidepressants were acting only on the brain. But we know now that, especially for serotonin, up to 80% is made in the gut. So that acts both locally to help with gut contraction, which is called peristalsis, so helping your gut move things along. appetite and digestion, but it also is affecting your brain. So that's more of an indirect route. And we're going to talk about how the microbes kind of, shunt these building blocks. So things like 5-HTP, which is the precursor to serotonin. These microbes will help produce that and send that to the brain, and then they make the serotonin. Whereas the serotonin in the gut is acting mostly on the gut, as well as the vagus nerve. And then there's dopamine. So dopamine is for focus and motivation. So this is the one where if people have any kind of attention disorders, dopamine is usually off. And GABA. So GABA is the one that alcohol acts on. So it's the calming, relaxing, kind of anti-anxiety neurotransmitter. And then there's norepinephrine, which is alertness. So what I want to make clear is that these are all built in the brain and the gut. Dopamine about 50-50, serotonin more so in the gut than the brain, and GABA about 50-50 as well. And that they do require these cofactors. So we're going to talk a lot about, possible nutrient deficiencies, things like B12, B6, and iron that are really common nutrient deficiencies that can affect your ability to produce these happy hormones. And the other factor, especially for people of European descent, Caucasians, it's very common for people of that background to have a genetic mutation where they can't, what's called methylate. So they can't put a methyl group and activate certain pathways in terms of making these neurotransmitters. So it really is difficult to produce them in adequate amounts if you don't have this methylation happening. And that's why we need things like B vitamins in a methylated form. So you'll see like methylcobalamin if you ever buy a B vitamin or a B12. That is the form we need because we need that methylation to be happening. So what is serotonin deficiency? Serotonin deficiency, you may have low serotonin if you have things obviously like anxiety or depression, but also if you're experiencing chronic pain, chronic migraines, insomnia, or addictive behaviors. So in terms of food, alcohol, drugs, these are all implicated to have like a serotonin. Also with addiction, it's more dopamine imbalances as well. And then the interesting thing about GABA is when it's low, you're going to have cravings for certain foods and alcohol. And the problem is we need enough serotonin in order to produce adequate amounts of GABA. So there's going to be a theme tonight in that everything is connected and works together, right? In Western medicine, unfortunately, for a very long time, even still today, everything is thought of as very separate, right? You have a stomach ache, you take a pill for your stomach. You have a headache, you take a pill for your head. Whereas in Eastern medicine and functional medicine, which is what I do, it's very much all connected. We recognize that the whole body and brain are connected. And so we talk about how those connections are formed. And so the other thing I wanted to mention too is that estrogen is actually needed to produce adequate amounts of serotonin, this happy hormone, and that serotonin produces melatonin, that's our sleep hormone, right? Some of you may have tried that as a supplement. And we need enough melatonin to produce GABA. So they're all connected. And so for those of you who are transitioning maybe into perimenopause or menopause, as estrogen is dropping, that's going to affect your serotonin levels. So it's quite common for women in that phase to start having anxiety or depression, even if they've never had it before. So let's talk about alcohol here. It's very tempting, I know, with all the stress we have going on these days, to reach for a glass of mommy's therapy, that wine or whatever drink is your go-to. But this is going to make things worse for your mental health. So having low GABA in the first place is going to make you crave things like alcohol or food. But when you have alcohol, it actually disrupts your sleep cycle and causes insomnia. So that's going to make you feel even worse the next day. And we're going to talk a bit more about sleep soon. But I want you to know that if you're not getting that deep sleep or enough sleep, you're not gonna feel well mentally. Your mental health is gonna be off. You could be doing everything else right, but if you're not sleeping well, you're gonna be suffering. And so having that drink, even just one drink, is going to disrupt that sleep cycle and affect your mental health. And on top of that, if you're someone who's trying to make healthier changes with your eating, because you know it's impacting, your hormones, your weight, especially your mental health, it's really hard to not give into those cravings the day after drinking, right? I'm sure you've all been there where even 1 or 2 drinks and the next day you're just craving carbs and comfort food. And that's because your feel-good hormones are off. So how can we manage anxiety without turning to things like alcohol? There's a lot we can do. I'm not going to spend too much time on this today, but we're going to talk a bit more about exercise later in the presentation. But exercise, honestly, is my #1 go-to. If I'm feeling off, I can do a 15-20 minute walk/run, which is what I do. And honestly, right after, my mental health completely shifts. There's nothing that works faster for me to boost my mood than to do a little workout. And it doesn't have to be intense HIIT workouts. It doesn't have to be like an hour-long run. It can be something as simple as 15-20 minutes. And honestly, that is the thing that will completely change your day. So a lot of the times, though, it's getting motivated, right? It's how do you get motivated? People often ask me that, and they're like, well, once I get motivated, then I'll start doing it. But unfortunately, it doesn't work that way. We have to talk ourselves into it, because when motivation comes from action. So when we start acting and doing little baby steps, maybe you just go for a 10-minute walk around the block, and the next day you do a little bit longer, and you start to realize, hey, I feel pretty good when I do that. And it really starts motivating you to do more, right? So a few of you have mentioned about perimenopause and menopause in the chat. We are going to talk a little bit about hormones tonight, but know that there is a lot you can do. Unfortunately, many women just suffer through it, but there's a lot you can do in terms of diet, exercise, and supplementation to help with that transition. And it doesn't have to be a rocky transition. Okay, so let's go through a bit more of these. Meditation is a really good one. I know it seems kind of woo-woo, and a lot of people that haven't done it before may think that, oh, I don't know what I'm doing, or I've tried to do it, but my brain won't shut off. Honestly, it takes practice, and I always recommend starting out with a guided meditation. So if you type that into YouTube, there's a lot of videos out there. The great thing is with guided meditations, they talk you through it. So you have something to focus on because there's someone talking the whole time. So that's something to try. And there's a lot we can do with supplements as well. We will touch on a few of them later in the presentation. I'll briefly mention a few of my favorites. The ones I tend to go to is L-theanine, which is an amino acid. And before I go on, I just have to say that I cannot recommend supplements. This is not me recommending to you. I'm not able to recommend supplements without seeing you as a client, because there's a lot of potential for side effects and especially interactions if you're taking any medications, especially with herbs. So herb and prescription medications often don't work well together. So if you're considering trying something like that, do see a practitioner or ask your pharmacist. So I do like L-theanine, and that is an amino acid that's taken from green tea. So we were talking about amino acids earlier, and we'll talk a bit more about that some of them, which are usually taken from proteins, are used to build these happy hormones, right? So theanine actually does that. And it's also very calming without making you drowsy. Yes, Christine, matcha is high in theanine. So I love that. I love taking theanine as a supplement, especially if you want to take it later in the day, because matcha does have caffeine, whereas theanine won't keep you up at night. And then there are some stronger, more sedative type anti-anxiety herbs, such as lemon balm and passion flower and valerian, among others. I do like lemon balm myself because it also helps with gut health. But again, those are herbs and they're quite potent, so always work with a practitioner. Okay, so let's look at serotonin. So we talked a bit earlier about, do you have a serotonin deficiency? And these are some of the common symptoms that you might have if you're low in serotonin. The good thing is there's a lot we can do to boost serotonin naturally without taking medications, but obviously if you choose to take medications, that is totally okay as well. Okay, so why do we have these imbalances in the first place? So let's talk about your microbiome now. We're going to dive into how this is actually happening. Dysbiosis that we talked about earlier, this microbiome dysbiosis, this imbalance or overgrowth of inflammatory microbes is going to cause inflammation, but it's also going to cause malabsorption. And know that especially if you have this overgrowth of bacteria, especially in your small intestine, called SIBO, that's small intestine bacterial overgrowth. And that's very common with people who have been on things like antacids long term. So these PPIs like Nexium, Prevacid, all of those. Or people that have taken a lot of antibiotics or have had chronic constipation. These are all risk factors for developing dysbiosis, but the antacids especially for developing this imbalance in your small intestine. And that is where this malabsorption comes in, because your small intestine is where everything is absorbed. So if there is inflammation and too much bacteria in there, it's going to prevent you from absorbing things properly, right? So you're not going to be absorbing all this healthy food that you're hopefully eating, but also you're not going to be getting the vitamins. Remember we talked about those vitamins that are cofactors to help you build these happy hormones. So things like B12 and B6. So these bacteria, if there's too much in your small intestine, they will actually steal your vitamins from you for their own use, but they will also prevent you from absorbing them and from absorbing other nutrients. So someone asked, can L-theanine interact with any meds? I can't, unfortunately, say for any certainty that it won't. It's less likely to than herbs. However, I always recommend checking with, again, with your doctor or pharmacist or a naturopath or whoever you're working with. Unfortunately, probably your doctor won't be aware of what L-theanine is because it's a supplement. But yes, if you have any questions, I always help clients with those kind of things. So if you're wanting to set up an appointment, we can definitely talk about that. And as a side note, I did offer anyone who signed up tonight, even if you don't come live, you get a discount for a session with me. So do take advantage of that if you're looking to optimize your gut health. Okay, so let's talk about, malabsorption and deficiencies. So what is your poop personality? I know this is kind of funny and gross, but I talk a lot about poop in my practice, and I think we need to normalize it more because your poop has a huge indication of what's going on in your body and what your general health status is. So if you are open to it, obviously you don't have to, but if you don't mind sharing in the chat what type of poop you are from this Bristol stool chart. So we obviously want to be more around the 4. That's like the ideal healthy poop, but things will shift, right? Sometimes we're more constipated, sometimes we have diarrhea, and there's many things that can cause that. But some of the signs that you're not absorbing your food properly is that you may notice you have stools that kind of float, or they are like pale colored, or when you go to flush, they stick to the toilet bowl. These are all signs of absorption issues. Typically, the most common thing that people don't absorb is fat. We need fat for many things, but importantly for hormone production. So we'll talk a bit more about that. We're not going to dive too much into hormones in this presentation, but yes, thank you for sharing, everyone. I know it can really vary depending on the day and what's going on. But yeah, if you have any of the signs of malabsorption, do talk to a practitioner, because you really are not just what you eat, you are what you absorb, right? So if you're eating all this beautiful, healthy diet, but you're not absorbing any of it, that's not going to do you any good, right? We need to be having this optimal gut health to really absorb all those great nutrients and vitamins and proteins and all of that. Because especially, we talked about earlier, these protein building blocks, right? So protein foods contain amino acids, and the two that we use to build these happy hormones are tryptophan and tyrosine. So for example, the way that serotonin is built is we take the tryptophan from the protein food, and your body uses iron, magnesium, calcium, B6, and folic acid, all to build the next step, which is 5-HTP. And then it uses vitamin C, B6, zinc, and magnesium, all to make the final product, which is serotonin. So you can see how if you become deficient in any of those nutrients, you're not going to be able to complete that pathway and build that serotonin. So anyone with chronic gut issue, there's always a chance of malabsorption, especially if you notice things like your stool is floating or sticking to the bowl or it looks oily. Do speak with a practitioner. And like I mentioned earlier, it's that small intestine, that the health of your small intestine is so incredibly important. So if you have this overgrowth in there, or if you have undiagnosed celiac disease, these are all things that are going to affect your absorption. And then as we age, we naturally, have some more malabsorption due to our aging gut cells. Also, one of the factors we're going to talk about is stomach acid. So we need that stomach acid, right? And that's why if you've been on an antacid, especially for a long time, you're not going to be absorbing things because we need that stomach acid to digest and absorb our food. Obviously, there's many other factors. So we also need digestive enzymes that come from our pancreas and our stomach. And we also need bile. And we're going to talk about our liver in a moment here. But bile is really important, especially for fat digestion. And bile is actually antimicrobial, so it helps prevent this dysbiosis, right? So if we have gallbladder issues and we're not getting enough bile production, and I know a lot of people that have had their gallbladders removed or had gallstones, that bile is not being produced or pushed out into the body. That's going to allow for bacteria to grow out of control. It's also going to promote constipation because bile is actually a natural laxative. So a few questions here. Can you be tested for gluten intolerance? Yes, you can. So if you're talking about food sensitivity versus like celiac disease, for example, we can do testing for both at Verger Wellness Clinics. So Dr. Spark and I work together with people to test them. She often does, it's called IgG testing, and that is a blood spot test to test for an immune marker called IgG to various foods, and one of them would be wheat. And then someone asked, can someone be tested? I guess you're asking like to see if you have nutrient deficiencies, I guess is the question. If you want to let me know, Jessie, if that's what you're saying. Yes, definitely. So that's something, again, that Dr. Spark would order. She's able to test all the common deficiencies based on what you're presenting with. If you're like chronically tired, often she would test your iron and your B12, at least to start. But that's something that you would speak to her about. And that's definitely easily tested, fairly inexpensive. So always good to check that. And vitamin D is another huge one, which I don't even know if I really included in this presentation now that I think of it. So I'll just briefly mention it. Yeah, so the most common ones we see in clinic in terms of deficiencies are B vitamins, iron, calcium, vitamin D, and zinc. And all of these are needed for your mental health. So iron, especially for women that are menstruating, that have really heavy periods. And vitamin D, because especially now that it's getting dark at like 5 o'clock, right? We live in Canada. We don't get enough sun exposure, and that's the main source of vitamin D. Our skin makes it from sun exposure. Thankfully, a lot of foods are fortified now. Health Canada has recognized that and is fortifying things. But if you're not eating certain foods, like for example, milk is fairly high in vitamin D and calcium, that's been fortified. But if you're not having dairy because of a sensitivity, we have to make sure that you're getting those nutrients somewhere else. Often my biggest recommendation for people is to do those alternative milks. So things like coconut milk, almond milk, rice milk, any of those, as long as they are fortified, which I'm pretty sure most of them are these days. That's a really great source to get those nutrients. But I always recommend testing because, for example, with vitamin D, typically, a lot of Canadians end up needing a fairly high dose because we're fairly deficient, but you also don't want to go into the health food store and buy vitamin D and start taking like 5,000 IU without knowing what your level is at. So it's safe to usually take about 1,000 per day, but if you want to take any more or you're worried that you might have a pretty severe deficiency, definitely get tested with a practitioner. Okay, so the other thing I want to talk about here is we talked about stomach acid. We talked about needing these cofactors like vitamin C and B vitamins to build our neurotransmitters. And talk about, sorry, lost my train of thought there. Okay, let's move on to the next slide. The liver and gut, that's what I wanted to mention. So I mentioned bile briefly. So bile is produced in your liver and stored in your gallbladder. And when we're talking about this dysbiosis, especially in the upper gut and your small intestine, we need to make sure we have enough bile. So a lot of people end up with a sluggish gallbladder. Whether or not you have stones or not, you can still have gallbladder insufficiency where your gallbladder, either becomes very thick, the bile, or your gallbladder just isn't able to pump it out like it should be. And then you're not getting that bile as a nice antimicrobial substance to keep things at, imbalance in terms of microbes in your gut. And then you also may develop some constipation. So there's many factors that can cause constipation, including gut inflammation from dysbiosis. It can be insufficient bile. It can be stress and low fiber diet. Obviously, we're going to talk a bit more about fiber later on, but know that we're seeing a lot of constipation and hemorrhoids in clinic lately. And I know a lot of that is stress related and the fact that people are turning to those comfort foods, which typically don't have that much fiber in them. So that's something to really be mindful of. So always think when you're eating something, am I feeding the healthy bacteria or am I feeding the bad guys? The healthy bacteria love fiber. The inflammatory bacteria and microbes love sugar. Okay, so let's talk about liver and gut. So they work together. Your liver obviously detoxifies things like drugs and alcohol and toxins, but it also is really important for building and balancing your hormones. We're going to talk briefly about hormone imbalances tonight because they can play a big role in mental health issues, especially when it comes to things like PMS and perimenopause. And estrogen dominance, which we'll talk a bit about, is quite common. There's many reasons why, but one of them is due to stress, and another one is due to toxins in our environment. So there's a lot of toxins in our world, perfumes and bath and body products and pesticides and all of these things. They kind of act like estrogens in the body, and that promotes this higher estrogen levels. So estrogen dominance is literally high estrogen relative to progesterone. So that could be, your own estrogen, or that could be some of these pseudoestrogens or xenoestrogens that are coming from external sources like toxins. And many women, because of stress and poor diet and things like that, end up with this low progesterone. And we're going to talk about the role of progesterone as kind of this anti-anxiety calming hormone and how that, typically should counterbalance estrogen. But when it's really low, it's going to impact mental health. And we're also going to talk about sleep. And obviously that's connected to hormones. For those of you who have cyclical insomnia, whether it's PMS or, if you're transitioning into perimenopause and menopause, it's quite common to experience insomnia then as well. So we know that hormones have a massive impact on our mental health and our sleep. So I mentioned that before. What happens is estrogen is needed in adequate amounts to produce enough serotonin. And serotonin actually gets metabolized into the melatonin, which we need for sleep, right? So yes, we can take melatonin as a supplement, but we really don't want to mess with hormones long term. So we really want to figure out why we're not producing enough of our own melatonin in the first place. And we're going to talk about sleep hygiene today, but one of the reasons a lot of us don't produce melatonin is because we are having too much screen time before bed. So I know we love our screens. I'm guilty of it too, but we need to cut down on screen time before bed. And then the other thing is gut health. Gut health will actually have a huge impact on sleep because we talked about it before, right? Anything that's going to cause inflammation in the body and the brain is going to impact your sleep, especially if it's histamine. Histamine is very stimulating. And then stress hormones. So we'll talk a little bit about burnout tonight, but knowing that, you know, when you're chronically stressed and you have this chronically high cortisol, this stress hormone, eventually your circadian rhythm, it's called, does a flip. So this circadian rhythm is this normal level of cortisol that you're supposed to have in a certain cycle throughout the day. So know that cortisol is fairly stimulating, and it's supposed to be highest in the morning, and that helps us wake up, and then gradually decline throughout the day. But when we're chronically stressed, that actually flips the cycle. So if you're someone who just can't wake up in the morning and you need several cups of coffee to get going, and then you never wake up, you know, until maybe later in the day, and then all of a sudden in the evening, you get this second wind. That is cortisol peaking usually. So that means because of chronic stress, your cortisol rhythm is flipped and you're going to have trouble sleeping because you have too much cortisol in the evening. And then the other thing is medication. So medications, especially things like stimulants, like Ritalin and things that are stimulants for like ADHD, for example, are very stimulating, and that can affect sleep as well. Okay, so let's dive into, yes, talking about relaxation. So this is me. I think I was camping with my friend last year in the fall. And I have talked to a lot of women that tell me they just don't know how to relax unless they have that glass of wine. The glass of wine is like the only thing that they can do to calm down. We need to find another way to unwind, because when we're chronically stressed, like we were talking about, those stress hormones are having a direct impact on our mental health. They're causing brain inflammation. They're disrupting our sleep. And they're disrupting our sex hormone balance. So know that when you're stressed, your stress hormones and your sex hormones are actually made from the same building blocks. But your stress hormones are always going to take priority. They are a survival mechanism. So if your body's like, okay, I'm in survival mode here, what's the number one thing I have to do? Make stress hormones. Because that's going to allow me to run from dinosaur, right? Back in the day. But when it's doing that, it's sending all of the building blocks to making stress hormones, then you're not going to be making your sex hormones in the right ratios, and that's going to impact your mental health, right? So again, when you're chronically stressed, over time, you're going to end up with what's people call burnout, or, you know, some people call adrenal fatigue or adrenal depletion. And we see a lot of that in clinic. And that's typically people, you know, if you're in these final stages of adrenal depletion where you're just completely exhausted all the time, you get sick very easily. For women, you may be getting, you know, yeast infections and UTIs all the time, lots of headaches and aches and pains. These are all signs that you're burnt out, and it's literally your body telling you to slow down and relax because it just can't take anymore. So this is where tuning into our body is so very important. And our body will always send us small signals like along the way, right? But we tend to ignore them because, oh no, I'm too busy. I don't have time to rest. I have to get these things done, right? But if we don't listen to those small signals, eventually it will become a very big health problem. And then we're forced to relax when we end up in the hospital or something, right? So always listen to your body. Okay, so let's talk about carb cravings. I know a lot of us are dealing with that right now. And let's talk about where they come from and what we can do about it. So it's kind of a vicious cycle, right? So we crave carbs, we eat the carbs, we're actually feeding the bad bacteria because, as we said, these bad bacteria and microbes love sugar and carbs. And then those microbes will actually send signals to our brain telling us to eat more carbs because that keeps them alive, right? They want to be alive and thriving. So they're telling us, you need to eat more carbs to feed me. It's kind of creepy when you think about it that way, but they are literally hijacking your brain and causing carb cravings. But the other thing that causes carb cravings, is imbalanced blood sugar. So you may know the term hangry. You know, if you've gone too long without eating, you get hangry, and then you start to get moody, maybe you're tired and lightheaded. That's because your blood sugar is crashing. And at that point, your body kicks into survival mode and says, hey, you have to eat something right now. I can't function with this low blood sugar. Blood sugar needs to stay in this healthy range. And when it gets too low, your body will do anything it can. And usually it's whatever's quickest and most convenient. And that's why at that point, you're craving carbs because your body knows that's the fastest way to get your blood sugar back up to a normal level. And obviously, too, it's a convenience thing. Whatever is close and convenient in our Western world is always going to be carbs, right? So this is where like planning ahead comes in. So if you have a busy day and you're going to be out running errands, you need to plan ahead and pack a protein snack because that will keep your blood sugar steady and, prevent you from getting to the point where you're hangry. And then you get home from the store and you're so starving that you start raiding the cupboards and you finish a bag of chips while you're making dinner kind of thing. I know a lot of people have been there. I've been there myself. I'm not perfect. But this is where planning ahead is really important. And the other thing here is with mental health, if we're already struggling with a mental health thing, so say we have some depression, we know that carbs will give us a temporary mood boost, right? They boost the serotonin and dopamine in our brain. And that's why some people argue that there's such thing as food addiction because it's very much acting on these happy hormones. We eat this food, we feel happy, but it's very much a temporary situation, right? And especially if it's a food that's very high in sugar and simple carbs, that's actually going to make our mood your mood much worse as you crash. First of all, you're going to have your blood sugar crash, and then it's going to be feeding that bacteria, right? So we talked about that bad bacteria loving sugar. So what can you do? I'm very much someone who is all about things in moderation. I don't expect people to completely cut out sugar out of their life, especially in the winter months. We love our carbs, but I highly recommend you eat it together with other foods that will help to balance your blood sugar. So if you want to have a brownie with your lunch, then make sure that your lunch has some protein in it. So if you're having, some leftover chicken with potatoes and vegetables, and then you have your brownie after, that's going to be okay because the chicken and the vegetables are going to keep your blood sugar stable. So how that works is, so carbs get broken down quickly and spike your blood sugar, but protein and fat and fiber are broken down very slowly, and that slows the absorption of the carbs into your body, into your bloodstream. And knowing that this imbalanced blood sugar also affects your sex hormones as well. So that might be a motivation for some of you who are really struggling with either PMS or perimenopause. And the other interesting thing here is that chronic stress actually, well, not even chronic stress, any stress actually raises your blood sugar. So your body's way of saying, okay, I need some extra energy so I can run from danger because this is a stressful, dangerous situation. So your body says, okay, here's some extra sugar so you have the energy to run, right? But in our modern world, it's usually not, you're not running from a dinosaur. It's the stress of work or a family member or something, right? So, but our body has evolved that way through evolution to always have this blood sugar surge when we get stressed. So that's why, if you get stressed and you have that blood sugar surge, but you don't eat anything, or maybe you just have a carb, like say you have a coffee and a bagel for lunch, then you're going to crash, right? So you'll get that mid-afternoon crash and you're going to be super, super tired. Thanks, Jessie. You can definitely check out the replay. So that'll be coming out probably in about 2 days once I've finished editing it. So mindful eating, what is your relationship with food? A lot of us are using food and alcohol to either to numb feelings or to feel better, like for a mood boost, right? And a lot of people, you know, we're usually in one camp or the other. So a lot of people come to me that are either eating what's called the SAD diet. So it stands for Standard American Diet, which is very high in carbs and sugar, but low in fiber. And then there's people that are very much eating, you know, clean eating. They strive to eat only clean foods. And then they beat themselves up if they have a treat. So what I always recommend people do is, you know, just listen to your body and allow yourself to enjoy the occasional treat. And eat it mindfully, right? So every time you're eating, you want to be eating mindfully and paying attention to every sensation that you have. So whether you're eating a meal or you're having a treat, notice, you know, the texture, the smell, what it looks like. What does it remind you of? Maybe your grandma used to make, you know, a brownie like that. And paying attention to all these senses really heightens your pleasure from the food and heightens your satisfaction. So you feel more satisfied when you're done eating, and you're not as likely to be like, I still need a little something else. And that's why when a lot of us, you know, in our busy modern lifestyles, we're typically, you know, eating at lunch at our desk in front of our computer. So we're not paying attention to the food we're eating. And we eat our food and we feel full, but we still feel like, you know, we need something extra. We need that little something to enjoy because we really didn't pay attention to what we were eating. So in general, when you're looking for nutrition information, unfortunately, there's a lot of junk online. If there's any, you know, diet or program that tells you to cut out like a whole food group, like carbs, for example, or that like all fat is bad or whatever it is, if it's very extreme like that, always be wary because we can't, in a healthy, balanced way, cut out these food groups. Like our body needs foods from each of these groups to function properly. And the other thing I wanted to mention, first of all, you don't have to earn your food. So a lot of people that have had, you know, difficult relationships with food, maybe based on dieting and their body size, they're unhappy with their body size. A lot of times we're told, you know, it's calories in, calories out. So you feel like you have to exercise enough in order to earn your food. That is a very dangerous and slippery slope to go down. You don't need to do that. And I want to empower you to understand that your metabolism is so much more complex than just, you know, calories in, calories out. So we're learning about the role of your gut, the role of your hormones, the role of stress. So, you know, looking at it from a standpoint of, oh, I burned 500 calories, so I can eat 500 extra calories. That's not the way to go. Okay, so let's look at hormones and stress. So we talked a little bit about burnout earlier, and I don't want to spend too much time on that tonight because I want to get to some of the tips. But chronic stress can lead to this burnout or adrenal fatigue, and it's going to impact your sex hormones. Like we said earlier, because those sex hormones are built from the same building blocks as your stress hormones. And in turn, this chronic stress can also actually throw off your thyroid. And your thyroid is a master gland for your metabolism, but it also will have a big impact on your mental health. So how do our sex hormones impact our mental health? I know it seemed like kind of a no-brainer for those of you who have dealt with PMS and or perimenopause, mood changes, but let's take a look at why that's happening. So we talked a little bit about estrogen dominance. And here's the thing, you know, as we start to transition into perimenopause or menopause, well, let's back up, I guess, first and say that in younger menstruating women, estrogen is made mainly in the ovaries. But as we get older, estrogen mainly comes from our adrenal glands. those are the ones that produce our stress hormones. But if we're burnt out, that means our adrenals are burnt out and they're not functioning properly. That means we're not going to be able to produce enough estrogen. And we know that that estrogen impacts our serotonin, one of our happy hormones. So we can see how, you know, as these hormones change, it has a direct impact on our mental health. And that's why many women start to experience anxiety or depression in perimenopause or menopause. And estrogen dominance, that's the one that's very common in younger menstruating women that can contribute to PMS and painful periods. And so this progesterone, this low progesterone, which is part of estrogen dominance, that is commonly caused by stress. That's one of the reasons anyways. And that progesterone is needed to, you know, it's very anti-inflammatory and calming. So it helps with when you're changing and shifting in your cycle from high estrogen to progesterone, it eases that transition. But if you don't have that progesterone, you're more likely to have some mood changes, some pain and inflammation, and just have all that good old PMS. Okay, and then the other thing I wanted to mention here was that estrogen actually acts in the gut as well. So there's estrogen dominance. Oh, you're very welcome. Enjoy. Estrogen dominance actually promotes candida or dysbiosis of yeast overgrowth. So if you haven't heard of candida, it's a yeast that lives in the gut, and it loves estrogen. Estrogen promotes the growth of this candida, and that's going to cause sugar cravings. And so that kind of creates more of a vicious cycle there as well, right? So you have this estrogen dominance, and it's promoting this overgrowth of this candida, and that's causing sugar cravings. So then you eat the sugar, and then that's causing more dysbiosis, and it's this vicious cycle that's going to cause gut inflammation, brain inflammation, and mental health issues. The other thing is too, the reason why a lot of women have gut issues flare up before their period is that there are estrogen receptors in the gut. So that's what can contribute to like some, you know, cramping, diarrhea, and gut issues that are typically would occur before, in your luteal phase before your period. Okay, so we talked a bit about what can cause hormone imbalances and how that can impact your mental health. So we know that chronic stress will do that. Having a burdened liver, so anything that is a toxin has to be filtered by your liver. So that means drugs and alcohol, but also pesticides and chemicals in like bath and beauty products. And then your gut bacteria. So really interesting thing here called the estrobolome. Excuse me. When your body and your liver senses that, you know, say you have this estrogen dominance where you've got a little bit too much estrogen, the role of your liver is to package that up and send it to the gut for excretion. But when it gets there, if you have the wrong bacteria in there, some of this inflammatory bacteria, this dysbiosis, they actually produce an enzyme called beta-glucuronidase that is going to promote the reuptake of this estrogen and just keep it in circulation in your body. It's not going to allow you to excrete it in your stool. So that means this estrogen is just going to keep climbing, right? And that's going to promote these mood swings and these PMS. So we really need to optimize both our liver and our gut to balance our hormones, and that can help with our mental health. And then the other thing I mentioned earlier is having this blood sugar. So blood sugar imbalances are going to directly impact your sex hormones as well. So we really need to eat to balance blood sugar, which I didn't touch on too much earlier, but I wanted to clarify that means eating frequently, so don't skip any meals. And it means having protein with fat and fiber at all of your meals and snacks. So having a protein source like meat, eggs, beans and lentils, nuts and seeds. Having a fat source, so whether that's like oil, like olive oil, avocado, nuts and seeds, fatty fish. And having a fiber source, so fruits, vegetables, and legumes and grains. Okay, so Project Happiness. Let's talk about what we can actually do to start boosting our mental health. first of all, we have to figure out what is the root cause. Is it because my hormones are out of whack? Is it because I have this dysbiosis in my gut? Is it stress? Is it poor sleep? Is it nutrient deficiencies? Often it's many of the above. And that's why, it can be really hard to self-diagnose, and you end up wasting a lot of time, energy, and money. I know I did in the past anyways, just, going to the health food store and being like, okay, I think I have this problem. I'm going to try this supplement. But then, it might at best help a little bit, but then you're still struggling and you're back at square one, right? So it's always best to work with a practitioner, and especially to invest in testing if you can. Okay, so we're going to talk about first how we're going to build a healthy gut. What food changes can we make to support the growth of healthy microbes that will reduce this inflammation to support our mental health? And again, those microbes are actually building some of these precursors to the happy hormones. So when it comes to serotonin, your gut bacteria are building that precursor, which is 5-HTP. They're also making things like B12, which is used to make serotonin, as well as other B vitamins. So we want to starve the bad bacteria. We want to really try to cut down on simple carbs and processed foods and excess sugar. Obviously, that's easier said than done when you're struggling with your mental health, but that's where, putting these other lifestyle aspects into play, which we are going to touch on in a moment, is crucial as well, right? Because it's really hard to cut down on sugar if you're feeling off. But if you manage to talk yourself into a workout, I know personally where I've been craving carbs like crazy. I do a workout, and then right after I'm like, okay, what can I make for dinner? Let's make a healthy dinner. Like, I start craving healthier food because my brain is in this better state. I've boosted my feel-good hormones from the workout. So starving the bad bacteria, feeding the good bacteria. So we want to have lots of fiber, 30 grams or more per day of prebiotic fibers. And other fiber is good too, but prebiotic fiber is the kind that feeds your healthy microbes. It's food for them. And that's typically soluble fiber, so things that dissolve in water. And we'll go into a few of the good ones here. So we're looking at things like onions and garlic, oatmeal, asparagus, artichokes, lots of fruits and vegetables basically are typical sources of prebiotic fiber. A lot of packaged foods now are putting prebiotic fiber in it as well. So you'll see it labeled as inulin or chicory root. Now, if you are someone who has IBS symptoms, you may be thinking, okay, back up a minute here. Like, I can't handle fiber. Every time I eat fiber, I get super bloated and gassy and upset stomach. If any fiber is causing you issues, you likely have a pretty severe dysbiosis going on in there. And what you need to do first is work with a practitioner to start killing off that overgrowth. So I use this 4R protocol with people where we kill off the inflammatory microbes, then heal up the gut lining, and then we put in the fiber and the probiotics and all the healthy stuff at the end. So again, this is where it'll be good to mention, yes, probiotics are great, and I will touch on them more in a minute, but know that if you take a probiotic when you have this dysbiosis, this imbalance in your gut, it's probably going to cause you more symptoms, more gas and bloating, because it's kind of a war going on at that point, right? You've got this overgrowth of these inflammatory microbes, and now you're adding a whole bunch of healthy microbes, and they're kind of battling it out in there. So we always want to, bring down the levels of the inflammatory ones first with a practitioner and a specific supplement protocol, and then repopulate with the good guys later on. Now, the other thing here too is if you have IBS and maybe you've put yourself on a low fiber diet. So personally, I did this for years, and I ended up causing some pretty severe inflammation in my gut because I was on such a low fiber diet. I was following what's called low FODMAP, and more recently I was doing paleo. And while these diets are great for helping to manage IBS symptoms, if you don't treat the root cause, this dysbiosis, you end up staying on this diet long term because it's the only thing that you can find to manage your symptoms. But at that point, first of all, you're going to develop deficiencies because you're very limited in your foods, but you're also going to develop gut inflammation because you're not getting that fiber, that prebiotic fiber that you need to feed your healthy gut microbes. So really make sure that if you're putting yourself on a diet like that, that you do it under the guidance of a practitioner like myself or a naturopath, because we can make sure that, first of all, you're getting all your nutrients, but secondly, we're using that as a short-term symptom management situation, maybe for a couple months or so, while we treat the root cause, which is the dysbiosis. We're not using it long-term over, years and years. And then the other thing here is antioxidants. So specifically, anything that contains what's called quercetin, polyphenols, or flavonoids. These are types of antioxidants that feed the healthy gut bacteria. You can find them in onions, are actually one of the highest sources of quercetin. And interestingly, quercetin is also antihistamine. I've taken that in supplement form for allergy season. And it's really interesting because this is feeding the healthy bacteria. And in turn, quercetin is antihistamine, but it's also bringing down your histamine levels by supporting the growth of this healthy bacteria. So onions, leafy greens, pomegranate, citrus, apples, raspberries, grapes, and cherries are some of the best ones for these quercetin and polyphenol antioxidants. Many teas are also very high as well. Okay, so here I am hiking in Hamilton last year, I believe. So exercise really is medicine. So we talked about this earlier, and honestly, I've been where you are, where you just don't want to get off the couch when you're feeling down. But that's the time where you have to talk yourself into it, because like I said, motivation is rarely ever just hits you. You have to build motivation by first taking action. So just small, imperfect action, even if it's, like I said, like 10-minute walk around the block, it's going to get you into the habit, and it's going to get you realizing that you do feel good when you do these things. Because exercising or any kind of movement releases these feel-good endorphins, and it boosts your happy hormones in your brain. On top of that, it's going to be bringing oxygen and blood circulation to your tissues. So that also helps with like focus and brain power. And doing all of this reduces inflammation. So that's one of the reasons they say exercise is medicine, is for people with, some moderate pain, doing a bit of exercise really does help reduce the inflammation. But I really want you to focus on doing something you enjoy. If you are doing a workout that you feel is work and you really don't like doing it, you're less likely to stick with it, and it's not going to have the same benefit. It's not going to have the same mood boosting ability. So find something that you enjoy. For me, I love hiking trails. I love running. I like yoga. So try some different things, right? And especially if you're someone who has any degree of burnout, especially if it's a very advanced burnout where you're chronically fatigued, no amount of sleep is having you feel rested. You don't want to push your body even harder. You want to do some gentle movement. And being in nature is clinically proven actually to boost your mood. So even if it's just sitting in nature, but obviously walking or hiking is preferable if you can. Optimizing sleep. So we talked a little bit about sleep earlier when we talked about alcohol and how that disrupts your sleep cycle. But there's a few other things we have to think about when we're talking about sleep. So one of them is your sleep environment. You want to keep your bedroom, keep it specifically for sleeping if you can, your bed specifically. You don't want to be, working in your bed or doing crafts in your bed or whatever you like to do, because then you start associating your bed with those activities. So your brain is always building associations. So if you mostly only sleep in your bed, your body knows, okay, when I get into this bed, it's time for me to go to sleep. Same thing goes with routines, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But I want to mention eating and drinking before bed. So we talked about alcohol, but especially eating. So you don't want to eat at least 2 hours before bed, especially if you're someone who struggles with GERD or heartburn of any kind. If you eat and then lay down, that's going to be really bad for your heartburn. Or if you're someone who has, no problem, you're welcome, Nancy. If you're someone who has indigestion and you're having a hard time digesting almost anything, you really want to give yourself lots of time to digest, because if you were to eat a big meal before bed, you're going to feel full and uncomfortable, and your body is working on digesting rather than shutting down. And then the other thing is drinking before bed. So even just drinking water or tea. So I always recommend sleepy teas, first of all. I'll say that teas like lavender, lemon balm, and chamomile are all really great for helping you fall asleep and reducing stress and anxiety. But ideally, you want to drink, the last of your drinks maybe an hour or two before bed if you can, especially if you're someone with a sensitive bladder, because you don't want to have you getting up to go pee in the middle of the night. Because anything that disrupts your sleep cycle is going to affect, how rested you are. Caffeine is another one, so no caffeine after 2 p.m. Caffeine is an interesting one because if you're struggling with something like depression, it can actually help. So that's why coffee is kind of like a mood booster. And I've never tell people to completely cut out caffeine, but know that if you're having it after 2 p.m., it will affect your sleep. And we're always remembering that the quality and the length of your sleep is going to directly impact your mental health. The other thing is having a routine. So when you have a bedtime routine, and you do the same thing at approximately the same time every night, that's really important to have your brain build those associations. So your brain says, okay, if say every night at 9 o'clock, you shut down your screens and you make a tea and you go read your book. Your brain knows, oh, okay, we're shutting down screens, we're making tea. That means it must be time for bed soon. So your body recognizes that routine. We talked about screen time earlier. So avoiding screens at least 2 hours before bed if you can. Some people start with 1 hour. I get that we're really tied to our technology, but it will throw off your melatonin production. So keep in mind of that. The other thing with screen time is connected to boundaries here. And especially right now, with all that's out there on social media and in the news, especially if you're someone who is very sensitive and gets worked up and overwhelmed and stressed out very easily, which you likely are if you're here tonight and you're struggling with your mental health, we need to set boundaries around what we consume or what we talk about with loved ones. So for example, with my partner, I had set a boundary earlier on in COVID saying that, okay, after dinner, we're not talking about anything about COVID or money or anything that's going to be upsetting, because that's my time to wind down. And if I start talking about that, I will get stressed out. So having those conversations, and then having that boundary too with things like social media, right? Because you could be looking at Facebook and sure, maybe a lot of it is, your friends' pictures and happy stuff, but there's also going to be a lot of stuff about COVID and elections and lots of negative stuff that's going to stress you out. So set those boundaries. And then the last thing is exercise. Exercise definitely will help you get a deeper sleep. So doing some exercise earlier in the day will really help with sleep, but try not to do it at least 4 hours before bed. So if you're doing a workout close to bedtime, that's going to get your heart rate up. It's going to get you, blood pumping. You're not going to be able to fall asleep. So there's actually quite a few supplements that have been proven to help with mental health. Again, I know I mentioned a few earlier in terms of anxiety. These ones are more specific to depression. But again, you have to check with your practitioner, especially if you are on a mental health prescription. There's very serious interactions that can occur, especially with 5-HTP. So There's a lot of probiotics, and there's a few strains that I believe I'm going to mention here. Probiotics have been proven to help support mental health because we know now that these probiotics are interacting with your gut cells and directly, affecting your immune system. They're building and absorbing vitamins and cofactors. They're breaking down proteins into the building blocks of happy hormones. So the probiotics are doing a lot in your gut for you. A lot of metabolism going on there. And so that's a really great supplement to try. It's fairly inert for most people, so it's usually a pretty safe one. Fish oil is great as well. So fish oil, especially in high doses, is very highly anti-inflammatory. And I hope by this point in the presentation, you've recognized that, inflammation is kind of the overarching theme here. This gut inflammation becoming brain inflammation. So the more we can get the inflammation down, and that's one of the mechanisms for both fish oil and curcumin, which is turmeric, the more we can get that down, the more, we can balance mental health. 5-HTP is the one I mentioned earlier. That's the one that our body builds when it takes things like tryptophan from protein, and then it converts it into 5-HTP, and then that gets converted into serotonin. But you can take 5-HTP in supplement form. Again, this is the one where you have to be very, very careful. If you're taking any kind of psychoactive medication, do not take 5-HTP without speaking with your practitioner. But it can really help people that aren't on medications to boost mood. And then there's two really interesting ones here. So curcumin, which is from turmeric, it works, as I mentioned earlier, through reducing inflammation. But both curcumin and medicinal mushrooms, specifically lion's mane, they increase what's called BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor. And that's something that affects our hippocampus, the part of our brain for mood and memory. And so those have a direct impact on your brain in terms of BDNF, which is really neat, specifically for promoting and regenerating neurons. So if you, for instance, have dementia in your family and you're also struggling with mental health issues, that might be a good choice for you when you talk to your practitioner, because it's going to increase that BDNF, which helps keep your brain neurons healthy. But this is the thing, if you aren't doing the foundational basics that we talked about today, so getting your sleep, doing some exercise, eating a balanced diet, and getting some social support, these supplements can only do so much, right? So they're called supplements for a reason. They're supplemental to a healthy, balanced lifestyle. Okay, so there are a few specific strains that have been shown in the research to help with mental health. Really interesting. So L. rhamnosus, L. casei, and L. brevis actually produce GABA, that calming anti-anxiety neurotransmitter. And for depression, L. reuteri, Helveticus, Paracasei, and Bifido infantis all support the production of serotonin by increasing that 5-HTP we talked about. So really, really neat stuff. But again, if you're someone who has this existing dysbiosis in your gut, this overgrowth or imbalance of microbes, we first have to kill that off before we start putting in things like these probiotics. Because first of all, it's not going to make as much of a difference when you've got too many of the inflammatory microbes. But secondly, it's going to cause you some symptoms, likely some gas and bloating. And then the other thing here too that I just wanted to mention was with the probiotics, especially in terms of immune support as well, because there is a lot of talk about that. So I'll briefly mention that. Regardless of why you're taking the probiotic, they need fiber to survive. So some of the probiotic companies will actually add fiber to the capsule. So you'll see it as like FOS, which is a type of prebiotic fiber, to help keep the bacteria alive and to promote the growth of the bacteria in your gut. but it's also really important to be getting that fiber in our diet. And that's why we're aiming to get at least 30 grams of fiber per day, ideally more. And keep in mind that that fiber is also helping to balance your hormones. And the other thing too, unfortunately with probiotics, we haven't yet gotten to the point where they are permanent. So taking an oral probiotic like this will stay in your gut for up to 14 days. And so we call it transient, right? It basically, it's in there for 14 days and eventually it comes out. So this is why fiber is so very important, because when we eat fiber, we're promoting the growth of the microbes that we have already in our gut. So we all have healthy bacteria in our gut. Oh, sorry, whoever has got their mic on, if you can just mute that, that'd be awesome. Thanks. The fiber is promoting the growth of this healthy bacteria in our gut, the ones that we already have ourselves without taking a probiotic. So adding that fiber is so, so crucial because, like I said, those probiotics are very temporary. We haven't yet got to the point where we can have them permanently stay in our gut. A few other things for mental health here. So light therapy is really helpful. I have one of these myself. If you're looking into getting one, make sure it's at least 10,000 lux. That's the strength that you need. I think pretty much all of them are these days, but always good to check. That's something you do in the morning only because it's supposed to stimulate sunlight, right? And reset that circadian rhythm where you are most awake in the morning and then things drop off, like your cortisol levels drop off and allow you to sleep in the evening. And that's something you do for 15-20 minutes in the morning while you have breakfast, because you are having a healthy breakfast, hopefully. And then treatments are really great for mental health as well. So obviously counseling, but massage therapy and Reiki can also be really helpful for supporting your mental health. So I want you to understand though that when we're talking about healing the gut and, you know, balancing our neurotransmitters, it does take time. We are really a quick fix society. We want these instant results, right? Because we're so used to, oh, you have a headache, take a pill, or you have a stomach ache, take a pill. And we get that instant gratification through our social media and stuff as well, right? We have to have the patience and understand that what we're doing here is we're going to be building a new lifestyle, and that often takes several months to start seeing some really positive changes. So you have to have the patience and the perseverance to really stick with these changes and make it a lifestyle rather than some temporary cleanse or fad thing. So this is why I work with people for at least 3 months, typically once a month, more often if they need the accountability. But that's why we do this, you know, at least 3 months at a time, because it does take time to really see these results. And oftentimes if we're doing testing, that can take up to 3 weeks to get results from that. So it does take time, but I guarantee it'll be, you're healing this root cause, so you'll feel much better than you ever will be with a quick fix solution. And oftentimes these quick fix solutions, like, you know, headache, take a pill kind of thing, it has side effects, right? So it's basically, it's a Band-Aid that's masking the underlying issue. So if you're having headaches, yes, it could be that you have this gut inflammation that's promoting headaches. But if you're just taking an Advil, that's just masking it, right? It's not treating that inflammation. And actually, things like Advil are really hard on the gut. So if you're someone who is constantly turning to food for comfort, you probably already knew a lot of this I touched on tonight. You know what you should be doing in terms of eating well, but you can't seem to stick with it. You know, you're always tired, you're feeling unmotivated, and you want to be able to actually enjoy food again without feeling guilty. The one thing I wanted to say here is that, you know, when you're working with a practitioner like myself, I do want you to enjoy food. So I'm not going to put you on keto or tell you that you can never have sugar again. Obviously, you know, depending on our goal, we want to reduce some of these inflammatory foods, but you do need to enjoy food, and that's part of a balanced lifestyle. So if this sounds like you, I think we would be a good fit. This is what a few clients have said about working with me. They've been really happy with the progress they've made on their gut healing. and they've really boosted their mood and mental health. Because of that gut healing, they had noticed a huge difference. I even had one person who I didn't include here. He noticed a big difference after only 2 weeks. So he had taken, I think it was 1 supplement, and we did a couple small changes with his diet, and he came back just glowing. He was so happy. He'd never felt happier. So there's 2 options if you're interested in working together. Because you attended the webinar today, I'm offering a $40 off promo. So typically I charge $140 for an initial session. So that's a 60-minute session, and that includes your personalized protocol. So that protocol is dietary recommendations, recipes, you get a supplement prescription, and lifestyle changes. But the most important thing in there is the accountability and support to keep you motivated and on track. Because I know a lot of you, you know what you should be doing. It's just a matter of trying to implement it and to make that your new healthy habits, right? So I am offering this, but only until December 15th. So if you're interested in booking in with me, do take advantage of that $40 off. The other option is I do have a Mind Your Gut package. So if you're someone who really needs the extra accountability, you actually save about $140 by bundling the sessions together. This is a 3-month intensive protocol, so you get more frequent accountability and check-ins. You get to feel better faster. So instead of, doing it mostly on your own, whereas with the initial, if you just did the 1 session with myself, you're not going to have the accountability and support to keep making those changes. I know, especially with, this is going to be a long winter, right? Like a lot of us are going to be struggling with mental health. We're going to be turning to those comfort foods. So I know a lot of you are going to be needing that extra support to really stay motivated and to know exactly what specific changes you should be making to really move the needle on your gut health and then your mental health. So if that's something you'd like to check out, it's up on the Verger Wellness Clinic website. So if you just go to vergerwellnessclinic.com and look at nutrition packages, it's under there. And for either of these options, if you are interested but you're not quite sure if it's right for you and you just want to ask me a few questions, I actually offer a free meet and greet session through Verger, and that can be done either in person or virtual. So that's an option as well. And you can book that by going to Verger Wellness Clinic. We do booking through Jane App. So it's vergerwellnessclinic.janeapp.com, or you can just Google Verger Wellness Clinic booking. And yeah, book a free session with me. Come and bring your questions, see if we're a good fit. Honestly, a lot of the time, I've had a lot of people come to me and say that they just didn't work out with other practitioners because they didn't jive, they didn't see eye to eye. So you really have to be on the same page as the practitioner that you're working with and really click, right? Like we have to be able to trust each other. So let's see if we're a good fit. Come visit me and have a free session with me at Verger. And also you can follow us on Instagram at Verger Wellness Clinic and Facebook as well. So thank you so much to everyone who stayed right to the end. I know I ran a little bit long, but I hope you got a lot out of this. If there's anything you want clarification on, please let me know. Sorry, Kristen, yeah, I'll answer your question in one moment. If there's any clarification you'd like on any of these things, let me know. You can always send me a DM through the Verger Wellness Clinic Instagram or email. Our general email is hello@vergerwellnessclinic.com. And then, yeah, I think that's about it. So thanks again for joining me. Christine, I will answer your question. You're very welcome, everyone. I hope you have a lovely evening and that you do something for yourself tonight. And again, yeah, any questions at all, feel free to reach out. Christine, you asked about gastric bypass, so Roux-en-Y. I did learn about that in school, so I took a nutrition program at Guelph, and I did work actually at an obesity clinic, the Wharton Clinic, for quite a while, so I had a bit of experience with some people that both pre-operation and post-operation. Unfortunately, you know, I I don't know, it depends what you're dealing with. If you're dealing with maybe dumping syndrome or nutrient deficiencies, I can likely help with that. I would probably have to, you know, meet with you privately and know exactly what's going on. But yes, I do have some experience working with people who've had gastric bypass. You're very welcome, Karen. Awesome. Thanks so much, everyone, for joining tonight. I had so much fun chatting with you and sharing my knowledge. And yeah, I look forward to meeting some of you in person someday. So have a good night, guys. And I'm going to sign off and take care.